All right, everyone, welcome to part 2 of Gut Health and Integrative Approach. And for those that don't know me, my name is Dr. Brendan McLaughlin, and I run Aquarian Integrative Health. So if you missed the first episode, it should be up on YouTube and our Substack now, if you want to go check that out. Last time we discussed standard testing methods for gut health. So just trying to figure out what's going on if you have gas, bloating, indigestion, cramping, nausea, and really why standard methods fall short. And on the flip side, what you can do to actually get real answers. Today, what I want to talk about is some of the root causes of gut problems. And we covered this last time in the last webinar, but just to give you guys a breakdown again, the real issues with gut health come down to a couple things. One, toxicity, so plastics, pesticides, pollutions primarily. Two, different types of infections, bacterial infections, fungal infections, parasitic infections. Heavy metal toxicity plays a massive role in gut health. EMF toxicity as well from our phones and computers. Blood flow issues, scar tissue, brain trauma, neurological constipation, circadian rhythm disruption is a massive piece to the puzzle, and emotional trauma. And so when we look at gut health here through our lens of how we look at health through mind, body, and spirit, or biophysiology, bioenergetics, or consciousness, we can kind of start breaking it down into different sections. And it's not that one is more important than the other, but it just gives us clues on where we need to go with someone's main issue. Because if we do a toxicity test and we say, okay, there's all these toxicities and all these different things, and we have to sort that out, or you have a heavy metal problem or whatever. But if the real issue is they have a lot of emotional trauma, which is precipitating a lot of changes in the nervous system of the gut, and all these different things, and they have some infections that are causing real pressing symptoms, well, those things might be more pertinent to test and treat before we get to any underlying toxicity. And at the same time, this can be completely different. It could be toxicity and circadian rhythm disruptions. Everybody's very different. And so to assume that everyone has X, Y, and Z, or to assume that we need to treat everyone the same is a misnomer. And the reality is too, you're allowed to have more than one thing wrong with you. We always want to try and pin it down on one thing and say, oh, that's it. And then we go through the therapy to do that, or go through a special program with a physician to do that, and we're still sick. It's because we've missed a whole bunch of steps, or we've missed other things, because there's a lot going on with all of our health. And part of that is because our environment is incredibly toxic. And this is a very pressing issue that continues to grow and grow. And because we're inseparable from our environment on some level, we are increasingly toxic. And so one of the major things in gut health that doesn't get discussed enough is the role of specific toxins that haven't existed forever. And so these are new things that our biology has to attend to, and we have to figure out and know how to deal with these things. And a classic example of this is pesticides. And we've used pesticides on our lawns, on our foods for a long time. For most people, they're generally considered safe. And the reality is that's a huge myth. Pesticides are not safe to use on our foods, on our lawns. It affects us, it affects our pets and our children. And it preferentially really affects the gut, especially when we're talking about glyphosate or Roundup. Part of that reason is because glyphosate depletes the probiotics within our gut, so all the good microbes in our gut, and allows pathogenic microbes to thrive. So highly pathogenic bacteria like Salmonella and Clostridium are resistant to glyphosate, so they will just keep growing, and glyphosate will knock out all our Bacillus and Lactobacillus because they're susceptible to glyphosate. And so when we do something like a stool test, or we do some special testing and it says you're high in Clostridium, you're high in Salmonella, if we don't deal with the glyphosate issue and the pesticide issue in somebody's life, that will be a continuous issue forever. And you can see here, this study done just showed the changes in the gut microbiome after glyphosate exposure. Again, bifidobacteria all gone, Clostridium and Salmonella through the roof. Okay, and obviously that's going to cause a whole bunch of problems. The other thing too with glyphosate or Roundup is it starves us of our amino acids. And so it damages the amino acids producing gut microbes, making us starve for tryptophan. And tryptophan's important because that means no serotonin, which is going to affect our mood and our emotions, and no melatonin, which is going to affect our sleep. And we'll get into melatonin a little bit later, but melatonin is one of the most important things for gut health. So if we're trying to correct our circadian rhythms and protect our melatonin production, but we're still confronted with a whole bunch of pesticide toxicity, then again, we're going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And this is just another example of why I always tell everyone you're allowed to have more than one thing wrong with you. And there's a lot of things that we have to deal with in order to get well oftentimes. The other thing with glyphosate is it binds to the microminerals in our food. So it renders zinc, magnesium, and copper not absorbable. And this presents a whole bunch of challenges. So a lot of times people will do like an organic acids test or different mineral tests, and they'll show deficiency in these things or toxicity in these things because they can't be absorbed. So the body's using it in peculiar ways. But if I'm confronted with all of these different pesticides and glyphosate, that's going to present a problem that probably needs to be dealt with before I try and go correct some of these minerals. The other big thing with glyphosate is it does not bind to aluminum. And in fact, it forms a composite with aluminum called aluminoglyphosate. And aluminoglyphosate easily gets through the gut barrier, goes into our interstitium or our extracellular matrix, and changes the membrane potentials of all cells and easily gets into the brain. And aluminum in the brain, especially in the pineal gland, is becoming a massively increased issue and causing a whole bunch of neurological problems. So again, we have a gut-brain connection through the microbes and through the nervous system, but we have a gut-brain connection here through certain types of toxicities. And the reality is with aluminum nowadays, we are inundated with constant aluminum exposure. And without glyphosate in the mix, aluminum, really only about 3% of it gets into our system. So even using aluminum trays and using aluminum pans and having to deal with pollution on a daily basis without glyphosate would be somewhat manageable for most people. But the problem is the absorption rate of aluminum that we breathe in, that we encounter through food preparation, goes up to 100% in the presence of glyphosate. Okay, and that causes real problems, not only with the gut, but neurologically. And the one thing with aluminum too, is aluminum potentiates a lot of infections, Lyme disease being one of them. So we kind of have this trifecta that happens a lot with people. You have a heavy metal toxicity, like aluminum. You have a pesticide exposure, chronic pesticide exposure causing a whole bunch of problems. And then you have some kind of chronic infection. So aluminum and Lyme disease go together. Last time we talked about the fact that nickel and H. pylori go together. And these things are very common. So if we only deal with the microbes, that's one side of the story. If we only deal with the heavy metals, that's one side of the story. And so we have to deal with all of these things together. And when we look, one of our biggest exposures of aluminum is from the air. Okay, so aerosolized aluminum, there's a lot of reasons why that happens. But the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, normal rain should have 0 to 0.5 grams per liter. And in California, there's over 1,500. And in Florida, where I am, there's about 180. So that is way, way, way above what the EPA has deemed as a safe limit of aluminum in rainwater. So every time it rains, not only are we encountering this, but it's getting on all our plants, all our lawns and everything. And when we combine that with glyphosate, it causes a real big problem. The other thing that glyphosate does, it impairs our cytochrome P450 enzymes. And those enzymes are pivotal for liver detoxification. And when these enzymes get impaired, our overall detoxification, our body's ability to get rid of other toxins or infections or harmful things goes down. And when this enzyme is impaired, the other problem is we can't metabolize vitamin D3. So we can get all the sun we want, we can get all the supplements we want, but we can't metabolize it properly. The other thing too is we can't break down vitamin A. And this is important because there's a lot of discussion around vitamin A and how it can be toxic, which is true, but especially in the presence of glyphosate and Roundup, we can't break down vitamin A, so it builds up in tissue over time, so you have to be very careful. The other thing too, we can't maintain enough bile acids, and bile acids are essentially the soap that washes our small intestine from our liver and gallbladder and helps us also emulsify fats and break down fats. So if we don't have enough bile acids, we can get stuck with certain types of infections in the small intestine, which shouldn't be there. And we can have a real hard time breaking down fats. And this can be attributed in large part to glyphosate. Okay. And even sort of the end consequence of this, a lot of times people say, oh, I have celiac disease or is diagnosed with celiac. And that can be true, but until we've ruled out chronic glyphosate exposure and the effects on the liver, the effects on the minerals, and the effects on the small intestine, celiac's kind of lower on the list. Okay. So, real quick, kind of what we do about it typically. Number one is you have to eat organic. There's been a ton of studies on folks that do eat organic, and even they have detectable levels of glyphosate in their system, but it's exponentially lower than the people who do not eat organic. So that's very important. Sulfur-rich foods, because the sulfur helps us deal with the glyphosate, and glyphosate inhibits our body's ability to get sulfur and sulfate specifically. Glycine, and glycine's an amino acid, and it's important in the presence of glyphosate exposure because what will happen is glyphosate will substitute for glycine in a lot of different systems in the body, and that can lead to joint pain and weak tendons, as well as disrupting the gut. So substituting extra glycine in the diet can be very important. We use extracts of peat moss in our office to get rid of glyphosate because there's a lot of great studies to show that that's an easy, effective way to detox glyphosate out of somebody's system. We also use glyphosate homeopathics as well. But one of the key things with glyphosate is we have to do aluminum detoxes as well, because the combination of that aluminoglyphosate molecule that is now in the nervous system has to be dealt with at some point. So the other major issue as far as pollution is concerned is nanoplastics. And the reality is nanoplastics destroy our gut, our liver, and our brain. And in 2025, remediation of nanoplastics is a required step for any gut healing protocol. And part of that is altered microbial activity is often a result of nanoplastic exposure. And especially when we're talking about something big like a parasite infection, one of the biggest growth factors for parasites is actually nanoplastics. And so again, if we find ourselves doing parasite cleanses and trying to get rid of these things because somebody told us we had one, or we know we have an issue with parasites, if we have to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, there's reasons why they're there. And parasites will use nanoplastics as food, as a cleanup crew for the body. So they do serve a purpose in this regard. But if we can get rid of the nanoplastics and then do a parasite cleanse, we will be far more successful. So basically what happens is we inhale or we ingest microplastics or nanoplastics, and eventually they make their way to the gut. Now, the microbes in our gut don't like nanoplastics. They don't know what to do with them. And so nanoplastics can cause a tremendous amount of dysbiosis within the gut. And all that means is it really shifts the bacterial balance in the gut. So between glyphosate or Roundup exposure and nanoplastics, we already have a situation where our microbiome is massively skewed, and just taking a probiotic is not going to be the solution. essentially what happens is with this dysbiosis starts to act on the liver via the portal vein, and the plastics will eventually start causing damage into the liver as well. So all these things we breathe in or we ingest as food additives or drinking out of a lot of plastic bottles. Plastic clothing is another huge thing too. So if I have gut issues and I'm trying to work on these things and I'm wearing polyester all the time, I'm drinking out of plastic, and we're just going to naturally sort of breathe these things in, and I continue to have issues, some of those environmental things need to be corrected so we can take away the source and then we can deal with the plastics after. Part of the problem and the reason why these are so hard to get rid of is we're confronted with this all the time, and it takes concerted effort to get rid of these things from our environment, but it is possible. And they've done a number of studies recently, and a recent study did show that we have about 10 grams of plastic in our brains. And this is just a one-off case where they looked at a donated human brain and tried to weigh it out, but it's about the equivalent of an unused crayon. Does that mean everyone has that much in their brain? No, but it's a distinct possibility that we have that much or more, just because everything in our environment now is plastic and our biology doesn't understand how to deal with that. One of the big sources of plastics that I see that I just wanted to note for everybody is from tea bags. And so a lot of times when we start a healing journey, we try and do different teas and different things to help our gut, like licorice root or marshmallow root or dandelion. But if we're using teas that are in plastic tea bags, every time we brew it and heat it up, all those microplastics get into the water. So we're 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There's also some research to show that microplastics interfere with the breakdown of milk proteins. So we can't break down the milk proteins and we think we have lactose intolerance, but in fact, it could just be plastics. So once we're able to remediate some of the plastics, our tolerance for milk proteins tends to change. This is another study showing that alteration of microbial diversity from the plastics causes breakdown of the blood-brain barrier, and we get metabolites that get into the brain through the vagus nerve. Okay? So normally things can't easily get into the brain because of the blood-brain barrier, but these microplastics are damaging the blood-brain barrier in a way that is allowing a whole bunch of things to get into the brain that shouldn't be there. A lot of different exotoxins and endotoxins via the vagus nerve. And the other big thing too is the neurotoxicity of nanoplastics disrupts the gut-brain axis circadian rhythms. Okay. And so a lot of folks now will be like, yes, circadian rhythms are important. We kind of have to wake up with the sun, get sunshine, have darkness at night, all those things. And that is massively, massively important. And I'll get into why in a bit later. But if we have tremendous amounts of nanoplastics in our gut and in our brain, it's going to completely disrupt our circadian rhythm. So until we get rid of the plastics, rebalancing our circadian rhythms becomes really difficult. So how do we get rid of this? Because this is a newer issue, there is some science on it, but basically we're kind of in the phase of trying to figure out what works. Clinically for me, the thing that's been the most successful is broccoli sprouts. Specifically, the sulforaphane from the broccoli sprouts does a really wonderful job at breaking down these microplastics to an undetectable level in a lot of people. We can also use N-acetylcysteine. Calcium D-glucarate can be very helpful. What I would say with that is try to opt for cruciferous vegetables first before you take a supplement. So cabbages, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, radishes, turnips, collard greens can be very helpful. And the nice thing with this, what we talked about last time, is calcium D-glucarate also helps detox excess estrogen. And excess estrogen can cause a whole host of gut problems just in and of itself. And so when we start to incorporate more cruciferous vegetables into our diet, even before supplementing specifically with calcium D-glucarate, we can get a decrease in microplastics and we can start getting rid of excess estrogen in the system. Grapefruit's been shown to be helpful as well, and hesperidin has been shown to be helpful as well. Again, this is a specific flavone found in citrus fruits, and so let's opt for fruits when we can. So more oranges, more lemons. Broccoli sprouts, the sulforaphane from broccoli sprouts, I do prefer that as a supplement just because the quantity that we need to eat 6 pounds of broccoli sprouts a day to have a effect on the nanoplastics. Okay. So those kind of big three things cause a whole bunch of issues. So pesticides, pollution, and by pollution, I mean the aluminum and the plastics. Okay. So these are the things that I wanted to cover first, because often these are the things that are just completely pushed by the wayside and everyone wants to focus on microbes, right? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, you got microbes, you got parasites, you got bacteria, fungus, whatever, let's just go in and kill them. That's a myth for a number of reasons. One, if we never deal with this, we're just stuck in a constant killing phase. And two, the microbiome is supposed to be in balance. And when it's out of balance, that means there's something environmentally, either outside of us or inside of us, that's causing a problem. And until we remediate that, it's really hard to just go in and try and kill everything with an antibiotic or herbal remedies. So we always have to ask ourselves, why are they there? Again, this can be from the toxicity outline. This can be from other heavy metals. This can be from a low metabolic rate. Okay. And the one thing I wanted to note with microbes, and we'll get into it a little bit more, is the idea of bacterial pleomorphism and what that means. So basically, the bacteria in our body work on a cycle, and they start as little protids or somatids. Different people call them different things, and they can grow into different forms. Now, those forms, at some point, we say, oh, this is pathogenic now. And we say, oh, you have this infection or that infection. But before it gets to that form, it's fine. And then after it passes that form, we say it's fine. Now, the thing to understand with this is we can go forward in time and become more pathogenic, but bacteria can also reverse and go back to a non-pathogenic form. And that's just an evolutionary mechanism inside of us to deal with our environment. So we have all of these bacteria inside of us that can change and adjust based on our environment. And it doesn't necessarily mean one of them is bad and one of them is good. It's just a constant adjustment between these things. And this is a very important thing to realize. Because if we go in and just try and kill things as much as possible, well, then we've also lost the ability for any of these bacteria to move backwards and forwards and respond to issues. And that's why excess antibiotic use leads to a whole bunch of problems with our gut, with our nervous system, and all these things later on in life. And so there's much better ways to deal with this. Now, usually with microbes, we start kind of at the big end of things, like the bigger microbes, and then kind of work our way down. But I just wanted to make a special note of bacteria first, being sort of on the smaller scale. One of the things people don't realize is what biofilms are. Biofilms are basically networks of bacteria, fungus, parasites, spirochetes that line our gut, line our lungs, our sinuses, our oral cavity, and they're very, very well-researched and understood mechanism. But as far as treatment, when people have gut health problems, most people just ignore the biofilms. Now, we can have good biofilms and bad biofilms. So again, it's not going in and just trying to break all of the biofilms in our body, because we'd get very sick if that happened. And the reality is most pathogens and microbes in biofilms are very resistant to antimicrobial agents, which is part of the reason why more and more people are becoming antibiotic resistant, because there's more and more biofilms. So typically someone who has a biofilm issue, when we see them, anytime they eat prebiotic foods or probiotic foods, they have a real big problem. They have chronic sinus issues that just won't go away. And, they've done blood tests or they've done a stool sample and everything comes out normal, because on a stool sample, it's just looking essentially for inflammation. And if I have a real biofilm problem and all these microbes are stuck within this biofilm, they're not necessarily causing inflammation, but they're causing different types of immune dysregulation long term. And again, we don't want to destroy the biofilms, but we need to remediate the pathogenic ones. And so to do this, we use short-term proteolytic enzymes or N-acetylcysteine. Taking those things long-term will have a negative effect on the beneficial biofilms, especially in our mouth and our oral cavity. Cistus, which is Cistus incanus, which is rock rose. It's a specific herb primarily grown in the Mediterranean, is a preferential biofilm breaker. And there's tons of studies on this. This study is on oral health, but there's tons of studies on gut health as well for cistus. And that's our first line of treatment generally for biofilms. You can also use cranberry, which is part of the reason why cranberry juice is effective for UTIs. Green tea as well, and bromelain. So the stuff you get in pineapple can be very effective and safe to use to start breaking down some of these biofilms. Now, a lot of times when we start breaking down these biofilms, what that means is we can get massive relief for a lot of the indigestion, gas, and bloating and things. But then as the microbes that were within these biofilms start to be released, it can cause issues that need to be dealt with, right? So there's kind of an order of operations of things, because if we never deal with the biofilms, it's really, really hard to try and deal with any of the pathogenic microbes. But in addition to treating the biofilms, we usually have to treat other things at the same time. So when the body starts breaking down these biofilms, nobody has a backward slide in progress. And one of those big things that sticks behind biofilms is parasites. And parasites are a worldwide problem. 4.5 billion people are affected by parasites every year. And it's very naive in the West because we just think, oh, that's a problem in other countries, but it's not in America or Canada or Australia or wherever. And the reality is it's a huge problem everywhere, because we are now a completely globalized place and everyone's traveling to all these different places and taking different parasites with them. So that causes it to be a worldwide problem now. There's different types of parasites. There's protozoa, there's roundworms, there's tapeworms, there's flukes, and they all look different and act different in the body. And I'm not going to get super specific with that today, but it's just important to realize that there's different types, right? So everyone assumes a parasite is like some kind of big, long, scary worm. Most of the time, especially the parasites that cause long-term chronic problems, they're not these big, long, scary worms. They're smaller protozoa and different things like that. The other thing too, parasite infections often come with co-infections. So stuff like different funguses and molds, mycoplasma, and nanobacteria. So where do we get these things? Lakes and rivers is a huge one, especially down in Florida here. A lot of people will contract parasite infections from being in different lakes and different rivers around, whether it's like water skiing or swimming or what have you. Pets are a big source, especially cats. Dogs and cats can both give us parasites, but usually cats tend to more, as well as other types of infections related to Lyme disease. Raw food, obviously, unprepared sushi, if it's not prepared the right way or it's not fresh, can cause a whole bunch of problems, but also raw vegetables. So there's a lot of cases that I've seen where people have gotten a parasite infection from eating raw vegetables when they were on vacation in the Caribbean or even within America, and they end up with a really nasty parasite infection because of it, just because it wasn't washed and prepared properly. Bad dental work can also cause parasite infections. Environmental pollution can cause parasite infections as well, and international travel, right? So that's sort of the customary thing that's thought traditionally, but like I said, every place in the world now has parasites endemic to that area. That said, if you go to a different place in the world that's known for more parasite infections, and then you have symptoms, that's something strongly to consider. Okay. The other big thing is, well, why are they there, right? And so lots of people can get parasite infections and pass them without kind of much of a problem. Usually the reason they stick around is in part we have a weakened immune system. In part, there's certain nutrient deficiencies that are weakening our digestion. In part, it can be a pesticide and plastic toxicity like we talked about. And in part, it can be heavy metal toxicity. And the reality is parasites store, in some cases, over 100 times their body weight in heavy metals within them. It can also be from other chronic infections. There's a lot of studies to show there's a massive connection between Lyme disease and parasites. A lot of parasites can store Lyme disease within them. And a lot of times the insects that give us Lyme disease also have parasites with them. And so this is just a study that was presented by one of my mentors, Dr. Klinghardt, that just shows how much lead and cadmium are in nematodes, which are a type of parasite, and how much higher it was than in the host intestine. So in some way, these parasites are remediating some of the heavy metal toxicity within us. And so again, if we kind of go on first principles, getting rid of some of the toxicity alongside dealing with the parasites is probably going to give us the most success, rather than if we just try and deal with the toxicity and pretend the parasites aren't an issue or not there. Or on the flip side, if we're just doing parasite cleanse after parasite cleanse, but not addressing any of the heavy metal toxicity or plastic toxicity or other things, we're going to get into big problems where we're just stuck on this loop. And so the number one symptom of a chronic parasite burden is chronic constipation. So anyone with chronic constipation, when we see them, that's first on the list is parasites of something that we have to rule in or rule out. Also, parasite infection can lead to gas and bloating, grinding teeth, weight loss, or weight gain. A lot of times people think parasite infections means weight loss, and that's sort of the classical picture, like when you look in medical textbooks, that's what they all say. But the reality is parasites also use a lot of our food that we're ingesting. And so we're hungry all the time. So we start eating more, and it disrupts the microbiome, which prevents proper digestion. So many times I've seen patients who've gained a lot of weight at the onset of a parasite infection. Craving for foods, especially hyperpalatable foods, especially high sugar foods, can be indicative of parasite infections. New allergies that have trickled to the surface that nobody ever had can be indicative of this. Mental and behavior problems. There's well-documented research to show that certain parasites cause very specific changes in someone's behavior and someone's mental well-being. So again, this is kind of connecting that gut-brain axis issue. If I have parasites in my body, in my gut, that can change how I think and feel. Obviously, constipation, like I said, diarrhea as well. In extreme cases, can cause abdominal pain. And a lot of times underlying the diagnosis of IBS or colitis is a chronic parasite infection that's causing persistent inflammation in different parts of the intestine that just can't be dealt with until the parasites are remedied. And so acutely, parasites oftentimes will cause an allergic immune response. So sudden onset of different environmental allergies, food allergies, all of these things. People can get hives, people can get all sorts of stuff like that. And then chronically, parasites, as they move deeper into tissue, into the lining of the gut and into different organs, can cause an autoimmune response, because in order to survive, they're suppressing the allergic response. That's a first line of defense and causing these chronic autoimmune type symptoms in people. The thing too we have to realize is not all parasites are bad. And what I mean by that is generally if they're in the gut and haven't moved deeply into other tissues, there's probably more pressing things that need to be dealt with. So not all of them are bad, but they can shift to being not helpful for us anymore. Firstly, when we start creating immune reactions against the parasite itself, or the metabolic products that it's producing, because these are living organisms that have a metabolism and they produce things out like ammonia, and we can have reactions to those things. And usually when we get these immune reactions, it's often misdiagnosed as some kind of lymphatic problem. And that's partly because our immune system is increasing histamines, and a lot of people are getting diagnosed now with mast cell activation syndrome. And this in part can be due to a chronic parasite infection. Another reason why they move from friend to foe is the exotoxins that they secrete and the metabolic waste that they secrete causes a whole host of problems, and can be misdiagnosed as a metal toxicity. And they're constantly competing for our micronutrients, okay? And so large parasites will eat up all our B vitamins. So we're not feeling good, we're fatigued, we might have some gut problems. We go get some basic blood work done. It says I'm deficient in vitamin B6, vitamin B12, put on those. That's not really remedying. A lot of times under this, it means that we're having a parasite infection that's been undiagnosed. Smaller parasites tend to eat up a lot of iron, so we can have iron deficiency anemia show up because of a parasite infection. Parasites can also just cause mechanical blockages in veins, in lymph, in different organs, and different ducts in the body that can cause a whole bunch of problems. And then we can also get focal areas of inflammation, especially in the teeth and the jaw. And focal areas of inflammation, if parasites ever get into our brain, will cause seizures, which is common not only in people, but also in animals. And so, just very briefly, what do we do about this? One, remediating the toxicity. Okay, why are they there in the first place? There's also a lot of psycho-emotional reasons why someone would have persistent parasite infections that need to be dealt with as well. But then practically, we need to make sure our stomach acid is increased. So when we're eating food, if there is parasites in the food, our stomach acid should be able to attend to that, break everything down, and so nothing gets to the rest of the body. And improving bowel transit times. Even if I have a known parasite infection and I have chronic constipation because of it, one of the first things is trying to improve bowel transit time so I can start releasing some of these things, okay? Big thing is, if I'm going to do any kind of antiparasitics, whether it's pharmaceutical or whether it's natural, the important thing is it needs to be treated aggressively. And what I've just seen over the years is a lot of people will take a little bit of this or a small dose of a pharmaceutical, and especially with parasites, a lot of times what you're doing is just irritating them. So they're leaving the gut and finding other places in the body to cause problems. There is a lot of wonderful natural remedies for parasites. The two things that work most reliably in our office is Artemisia annua and myrrh. And so with myrrh, we use a special ozonated oil form of myrrh that can work wonderfully. And then from a dietary perspective, figs are a wonderful antiparasitic. Garlic is a wonderful antiparasitic. Pumpkin seeds, ginger root, those are all wonderful things. Usually I encourage people to start consuming those things before they have a parasitic problem. If they have a parasitic problem, those things can be helpful, but we need to step up the strength of things. Okay. And so between the plastics and pollution and pesticides and the biofilms and parasites, if we can understand how those things are involved in creating gut problems and work to remediate those things, that is instantaneously a huge win and can give us so much relief in these things. Again, it's important to have a proper diagnosis and find someone who knows exactly what they're looking for with this. The other big thing I wanted to talk about is teeth and the role of kind of our oral health on gut health, okay? And I talked about this kind of in the first webinar, but I wanted to elucidate it out a little bit more. Number one thing with teeth is the dental amalgams that a lot of us have or have had. And the reason why this is problematic is because dental amalgams contain mercury. They also contain tin and nickel and silver and other compounds. They're an amalgamation of different metals. The problem with this is elemental mercury in the amalgams converts to methyl mercury from the bacteria in our mouth and gut. And methyl mercury is 50 times more toxic than elemental mercury. And what we can see when someone gets metal amalgams put in that contain mercury, after 7 days, it decimates the gut microbiome. Okay. This is a really important thing. So someone who has chronic gut problems, but they have metal amalgams in their mouth, you can take all of the supplements you want, you can remediate the infections, you can do all of these things. But until we do something about the mercury that's constantly leaching out of the teeth and into our oral microbiome and into our gut, it's going to be a very difficult road. Okay. And so briefly, kind of what we do with that, we have to remediate the source, like I just said. Best way to do that is find a dentist from the IAOMT, okay, if you're in America. And if you guys are watching this on YouTube or on Substack, I have an interview with the president of the IAOMT, Dr. Charles Caprill, just on the dangers of mercury amalgams and sort of the consequences of that and what a good qualified dentist can do to help remediate those things. So I encourage you guys to check that out. Once you've remediated the source, then you have to do a mercury detoxification. And that's a whole other kind of 2-3 hour discussion. But the only thing that I would say is mercury detoxification usually has to be a long, gentle, slow process. Okay, you have to know what you're doing. And there's a lot of people who want to do it quick with high doses of chelation and all these things. The problem is once we start pulling mercury out in very fast ways, it can damage the kidneys, it can damage the gut more, it can damage nervous system a lot more too. So we have to be very, very careful with this and do our due diligence. Okay. The other big thing people miss is tonsils. And our tonsils, if we still have them, are connected directly to the gut via something called the gut-associated lymphatic tissue. So our tonsils are connected to our lymphatics are connected to our gut. And the tonsils are the first thing that encounters food, priming the immune system for food to enter the digestive tract. So if I have a chronic infection in my tonsils, I'm going to have some kind of infection in my gut through this mechanism. Tonsils are the first lymph nodes in the gut-associated lymphatic tissue. So we also have a problem because if we have infected tonsils, it means we have infected lymph nodes. And this can be from strep or staph or rickettsia or Bartonella or a whole host of other things that can live in the tonsils. The problem with this is the tonsil sends signals to the rest of the lymph nodes that the infection is normal. So if you had a acute tonsil episode and it went away and they shrunk down and you didn't get them removed, what'll happen is most physicians will say, oh, it's not a problem. They're not actively swollen. Just leave it. But you have these chronic infections sitting in your tonsils, which are not only disrupting your gut, but they're disrupting all of your lymph nodes in your system because the immune system develops an unresponsiveness to the bugs. The other thing too is the tonsils are innervated by the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay. And the glossopharyngeal nerve shares a portion of our neurology with our vagus nerve. So what can happen is toxins and infections and issues in the tonsils can hitch a ride on the glossopharyngeal nerve through axonal transport, which we talked about last time, and get onto the vagus nerve and cause a whole bunch of problems within our gut through the nervous system. So there's many, many ways that infections in the tonsils can get into our gut, whether it's through our neurology, whether it's through our lymph system. And we just have to understand that because this becomes an important thing. because a lot of people that we see who have chronic gut problems, if we dig into their history enough and do the proper workups, realize that they had tons of tonsil infections when they were kids. Maybe they got them removed, maybe they didn't. And the problem is, even with removal, sometimes they don't take all of the tonsil tissue out. So we're left with this sort of chronically infected tonsil tissue that's there. So what do we do about it? In our office, we utilize different bacterial isopathics to change the microbiome in the mouth, to change the microbiome within the tonsils. We use a lot of frequency medicine, so frequency-specific microcurrents, very helpful here to decrease any infections or issues within the tonsils. We also utilize neural therapy here to bring about a proper immune response in the tonsils. And we do some lymphatic drainage as well. If we do a whole host of lymphatic drainage, especially around the tonsils and the front of the neck, and someone gets instantly sick, people see videos and say, oh, I should try that. It can cause a whole bunch of problems because we're just trying to move stuff here. And so until we have a clear picture on what's going on in tonsils and what's going on in the lymph, this is usually a thing we do later. Okay. Now, a lot of docs will say we should just remove the tonsils if you have any gut issues or any oral microbiome problems. And there's a bit of controversy around that. That's the last thing that we would want to do. I understand why people suggest that, and it makes a lot of sense. But the reality is our tonsils are integral to our lymphatic system, to our immune system. So unless we absolutely have to, and we've tried all of these other things and that hasn't been successful, we want to save that kind of for last. Now, the other thing that people miss in this gut health conversation that I discussed last time is what's going on with our thyroid. Our thyroid is pivotal to our metabolism. And the reality is our body needs energy. And the thyroid is the master control switch for our energy. So when our thyroid's not working properly, that slows down stomach acid production, that slows down digestive enzyme production, that slows down gut motility, that upsets our microbiome balance, and we can get a whole bunch of problems. So a lot of times people get a diagnosis of SIBO or small intestine bacterial overgrowth, and a lot of this can connect back to what's happening with the thyroid. Okay. So I have an issue with my thyroid. It's not working well as possible. My metabolism starts to go down. My temperature starts to go down. My gut motility starts to slow down. And then all of a sudden I have all of these gut problems. But unless we take a really good look at the thyroid, we're going to miss that piece and always be worried about the gut. The reality is this is a two-way street too, because the composition of our microbiome can affect how much micronutrients we get that are needed from the thyroid gland. Things like iodine, iron, copper, selenium, zinc, and vitamin D. If my microbiome's messed up, my thyroid's not going to be able to get the appropriate prerequisites to function properly. The other thing I wanted to point out too here, which we see in clinical practice, is the thyroid in part is innervated by the recurrent laryngeal nerve. And the recurrent laryngeal nerve here, you can see it sort of right there. And this is sort of a thyroid that's been pulled back when they're looking at the side. So it's kind of a funky picture, but it's important to see because the vagus nerve comes down, and we've talked about the vagus nerve a lot, and then the recurrent laryngeal nerve branches off of it. So if I'm having an issue in my vagus nerve because of a toxicity or an infection, it's very easy for that on the way to the brain or out of the brain to get involved in the thyroid. And that can cause a whole host of problems. And so the solution for this is first understanding. And so we just have to realize that thyroid controls our metabolism, and how well our metabolism is functioning is directly correlated to how well my gut is functioning. Okay. And we have to get a clear picture on what the thyroid's doing. And we also have to look deeper and see, is there a toxicity? Is there infections? Is there something going on? Maybe because of the vagus nerve, maybe because of all the lymphatics in the veins that sit on either side of the thyroid that is causing problem. And this is a massively missed piece in the whole gut health conversation. The other thing that's massively missed in the whole gut health conversation, when we're talking about root causes, is stress and emotional trauma. And the reality is stress will completely destroy your digestion. So it worsens gut immunity, allowing for dysbiosis. It slows down motility again. It can also cause diarrhea as well. So everyone's familiar with somebody, whether it's personally or somebody else, who when they get super stressed, they have to run to the bathroom, right? And this is because of the changes in motility. Impairs energy production and directly drives inflammation. Now, stress is emotional stress, but it's also physical stress. So if we've had an injury, especially a neck or a head injury, that can directly change a lot of the nerve firing. It can directly change our gut health very quickly. Nutrient deficiencies are also a physical stress. Scar tissue is also a physical stress. And so as an example, if I'm deficient in any of these things, it will increase my baseline levels of stress. So magnesium, ideally we get magnesium from foods, vitamin D, so sunshine, carbohydrates, salt, potassium, and vitamin C. A lot of the times, people, when they have a gut problem, they will go on a diet. And they'll go on a diet that cuts out all fruits, all vegetables. They've cut out carbohydrates, which are massively important for decreasing stress. A lot of times they cut out salt, and then we get rid of a lot of these potassium containing foods. So we have to be very, very careful when we're choosing diet for gut health, because the name of the game is, yes, we have to repair the gut and do all of these things partially through diet a little bit, but there's so many dietary things that we can do that decrease stress, and stress plays such a massive role in gut health. We have to be sort of very careful how we balance that. So when it comes to managing stress, basically from what we do environmentally, get more sunshine, eat carbohydrates, salt your food, get potassium and vitamin C. And a big component of this, which we talked about last time, is the vagus nerve, because the vagus nerve not only controls our gut, it's also central to our emotions and how we process things. And so when the vagus nerve is impaired, whether it's from toxicities or trauma or chronic stress, it causes a whole bunch of problems. So it decreases gallbladder function, it decreases pancreatic enzyme function, decreases liver detoxification, and can cause chronic constipation. This is an important thing to remember, because it's always a combination of some kind of toxicity, some kind of infection, and some kind of stress. And until we remedy those things, cleaning up our gut health becomes very, very hard, right? And a lot of people have stressful jobs, stressful family life, stressful things. And so in part of healing, we have to change our relationship to those things. Big thing that's not discussed too is suppressed emotions. This is a very real phenomenon, because what happens is when something happens and I don't get to express the emotion properly, it doesn't get dispersed across the body. That electrical charge that's created from that emotion doesn't get dispersed across the body. And the limbic system irritates areas of the hypothalamus that are associated with certain organs. And depending on the stress, it will be different types of organs. And that leads it to changes in blood flow and oxygenation of the organs associated with that area of the brain. And specific emotional conflicts always irritate the same area in the hypothalamus, and therefore have the same effect on certain organs. And on the flip side, not only do stuck emotions create distinct changes in the brain from these electrical charges that aren't dispersed, but each emotion anchors us into a specific organ directly. So when an emotion is not allowed to flow and allowed to disperse, they build up electromagnetic force within an organ system in tandem with the brain. So we have electrical signals from the brain going to the organ, changing blood flow and oxygenation, and we have electromagnetic changes in the organ itself. And in our practice, we kind of go through this process with people. This is just a sample of different organs and different emotions that can be possibilities. So if I have a chronic small intestine problem. Yes, ruling out infections. Yes, vitamins. Yes, malabsorption. All of these things can be correct. But if I have a fundamental suppressed emotion with loneliness or abandonment or feeling neglected, in many ways that precedes a lot of these other things. And in many ways, the stuff that gets stuck in our small intestine is because of this emotional trauma that was never just dealt with. So it's important that these things get recognized, and it's important that these things get dealt with appropriately and expertly. Okay. And many of these things come down to indigestible traumas. So people will say, I just can't swallow what happened. Or they'll say, I can't stomach what happened to me or what happened to my child. And these indigestible traumas, in a real way, through the mechanisms I just explained, cause problems in our stomach or small intestine or spleen or pancreas, you name it. Because all of these oppressed emotions get stored at the level of the organs and create very specific changes in the brain. So until we can release these things and allow someone to move through these emotions and disperse these electromagnetic charges, they're going to continually have problems. So we've talked about a lot of different root causes, some of them environmental, right? Obviously the pesticides from our environment, the plastics from our environment, heavy metals from the environment, all of these things. But what I'm talking about is the daylight cycles in our circadian biology here, okay? And people will say, oh, there's nothing to do with gut health. And to those people, what I say is, what if there was a substance that acted like a potent antimicrobial, improved metabolic disorders by increasing the diversity and abundance of intestinal microbiota, increase the abundance of Akkermansia flora, which is incredibly important for us, strengthen the tight connections between cells and regulated intestinal permeability, and accelerated the emptying effect of gastrointestinal tract, enhancing gastrointestinal function and promoting peristalsis. People will say, amazing, what's the drug? I need to have that. The reality is we produce this substance within our own bodies, but our daily habits are completely messing it up and limiting the ability of it to be produced and released. And daily habits like this, because what this substance is melatonin. And so when we expose ourselves to electronics at night and bright light at night, we shut off melatonin release. So under perfect normal circumstances, sun sets between 7 and 8, 9, and our brain starts releasing melatonin around 10:30, 11:30. And then we get a whole bunch of hours with lots of melatonin release, which has such a potent effect on the gut. Now, if the sun sets, between 7 and 8, and then I'm watching TV, I'm on my phone, I'm playing on my iPad, and I'm doing nothing to remediate that blue light exposure, well, melatonin doesn't start getting released until much, much later. So all of a sudden, we've compressed the window dramatically for how much melatonin gets released. And this can cause a whole host of problems. And so when we're talking about circadian biology, what I mean is different parts of our body have different circadian clocks to know what time it is, right? To know the difference between daylight and nighttime. And this drives all of the processes in our body. And so we have a central clock, or SCN, that through our eyes and into our brain, but all of our end organs in our digestion have peripheral clocks that get signaled by light exposure to the eyes. Okay. And this is especially important for digestive function because our circadian clocks control the gut's immune system, motility, enzyme secretion, and overall digestive function. So our liver, our pancreas, our gastrointestinal tract all have these peripheral clocks that are driven by the light exposure into our eyes. And so we can see that there's very distinct uh, things that happen at certain times of day as far as our digestion. Okay. And if our clock is not balanced, then we're going to have a whole host of problems. And when we actually look at the studies, people with disrupted rhythms are at about a double risk of getting IBS. And people with IBS almost always have a component of high serotonin in the gut. And this directly corresponds with the decreased conversion of melatonin. So serotonin should convert into melatonin in some part. And when it can't, because we're exposing ourselves to blue light and we're doing all these different things at night, then we get excess serotonin. That in part causes IBS, and we end up with all these different gut problems. Okay. And there's a ton of studies to show that melatonin supplementation can put IBS into remission, which is incredible because this is a condition that's thought that, oh, there's no solution for it. We just have to manage it. Now, we can also get the same effect by really, really working on blocking blue light, getting daylight sunshine, and getting our bodies to produce melatonin again effectively. And the reality is the circadian clocks in the gut need regularity. And when it's lost, we see disturbances in GI health. And this is because all the processes within the gut have very specific rhythms that fluctuate throughout the day. And so a big part of gut health is doing the right things at the right time. So waking up at a similar time every day, eating at a similar time every day, getting the appropriate level of light from the sun during the day, and blocking blue light and white light at night when it's supposed to be dark out. And many times, unless we do these things, fixing chronic gut issues becomes very, very challenging. And so, like I said, main things are consistent sleep-wake times. That's massive for resetting our circadian rhythms. Sunlight exposure to the eyes, especially in the early morning. Eating at the same time every day. I know that's challenging based on some people's lives, but becomes a very, very important thing, especially breakfast. And so if we can reset ourselves by eating breakfast at the same time every day, that keeps our body on a reliable schedule. Our digestive system knows what to expect, and it matches our natural environment. Blocking blue light at night is a massive thing. So limiting electronic devices, wearing blue light blocking glasses. There's a whole host of things that we can do here. Changing some of the lighting in our house can be massively helpful. And grounding. And I bring up grounding specifically because an hour of putting your bare feet on the ground rapidly improves gut function. So it increases blood flow and lymph flow to the gut, and improves gut motility and restores blood flow to the diaphragm, and is involved in increasing stomach acid production and increasing digestive enzyme production. So by simply incorporating this into our lives, which we're all meant to do, can have a massive effect on gut health, and it's completely free. And the reality is we can't get well in the same environment we got sick in. And so many people are conditioned to think, well, if I just take these pharmaceuticals or I just take this supplement, I can get better. And that may be true for some folks, but we're just confronted with so many things now, all the toxicities, all the different microbes, all the different environmental challenges, the circadian rhythm problems, the chronic stress, that it's really, really hard. And so what we really have to do is concentrate on what changes we can create in our environment to foster healing. Okay. Because if my environment is not conducive to healing, it doesn't matter what I do, what I take, whatever, I'm not going to get better. Okay. And we really, really have to understand this when we're talking about gut health, especially because our guts are so sensitive to our circadian biology. Our guts are so sensitive to stress. And in many ways, kind of our gut will give us signs. our gut will give us signs to show us that there's something wrong that needs to be addressed. And part of the reason why people are so sick nowadays is because people have chronic gut problems that they just never deal with. And then all of a sudden that starts to manifest as neurological problems, as joint problems, as all of these other conditions. When if we really work on our gut health and really work on aligning ourselves to proper circadian biology, eating organic food, then we can start winning. Okay. So kind of run out of time to really deep dive into some of the other treatments that we do. So for now, we're going to say goodbye. And if you guys have any questions, please reach out to us. You can text us anytime, 689-325-8361. You can email us, or you can book a free call with us on our website. Next time, we'll go into more of the fine-tuning of what we do for treatment as far as gut health. And in the interim, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you.